Philip K. Dick fan and you want to collect like a first edition and you want to know what that would be, this particular issue is from 55 to 55 to 2012, so it's relatively up to date, but it's all color photos, and they give you a bit of information from each novel released, and you can go and see like, okay, so this is the first edition, and then, oh, this came out, and this is like an English edition. It's a very useful, handy guide.
Precious artifacts.
Yeah, precious artifacts, the bibliography on Philip K. Dick. But yeah, it's a good handy guide if you decide to collect books. Personally, I've tried to collect Philip K. Dick books, but it's been like a struggle because as I like gain some, I want to spread the word and be like, oh, you should totally read this book. So I meet a friend or I like reconnect with an old friend and I go, oh, here, take this book. And then my collection kind of just keeps fluctuating where I'm like, oh, I have this copy. See,
that's my secret. I don't do that.
All right,
I'm just going to break in. So Daniel, Mr. Giles. Sorry, I'm sorry, I got confused. Keith Giles, your speciality, I believe, you have a subject matter expertise in PKD's religious aspects of his work, Mercerism, all that.
Yeah.
Can you kind of discuss that in his works?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Yeah, so, and I forgot to mention, I have an online course I'm doing that starts next month called The Gospel of Philip K. Dick. So I talk about all this kind of stuff in there too. Yeah, I don't know about you. I imagine a lot of you here, I'm just going to ask, raise your hand, if the very first, your entry point to Philip K. Dick was a film called Blade Runner. Raise your hand. Right, okay, so that's me. At least half of you, I'm going to guess, like, at least half of you, right? So that was my entry point as a young man. Saw it on cable, because I didn't get to see it in the theater. I saw it on cable, and I was, like, blown away. And then I went right out and bought the novel, right? And because the novel said Blade Runner, and Philip K. Dick, and so I bought the novel, and hey, that novel had nothing to do with the movie. But the wonderful surprise was that in many ways it's like really even better than the movie I thought. That was what I was just blown away with. There's so many great ideas that are in the novel that didn't show up in the film, and I get that, I understand that. But one of the coolest things I think that's in the novel that Phil develops is Mercerism. And it plays a really key role in the whole theme of the novel, because I think the real theme of the novel, the real point of the novel is empathy. And what Phil is trying, in fact, if you know the backstory of Do Androids Dream of Like Your Sheep, which is the novel, what gave Phil the idea for the novel was he was watching the Nuremberg trials, which were the trials after World War II, and they were putting Nazi officers on trial for their crimes, and they were giving testimony, right, of the atrocities that were committed at some of the camps. And there was a specific, I guess, an officer that was on trial, and he was trying to gain sympathy from the judge and from the people, and he was saying, you guys have to understand, I suffered too. It was horrible. I couldn't sleep at night because all these children kept crying all night long, and I couldn't get any sleep. And this went on for weeks, right? So that's the moment where Phil realized this person looks like a human being. They sound like a human being. In every way, I would believe they're a human being, except they're lacking one key ingredient. They're lacking empathy. And so that's where he got the idea for the novel. Like, what if one day we could technologically create a human being that was real in every possible way, except they lack this one thing, empathy. Right? So that's why there's the VK device, right, which measures empathy. It tries to figure out. That's the only way to find out who's really a human being. But the great thing about the novel is Deckard finds himself at this kind of weird sort of tipping point where he could almost go that way. At the beginning of the novel, he doesn't care about anything other than himself. And I think it's also ironic that in the novel, not in the film, there's something called a Penfield mood organ. And the irony is that the real humans, have to have a device to artificially stimulate emotion in themselves. Right? They'll dial up anger, or they'll dial up sadness, or they'll dial up joy or happiness, or whatever. And yet, then Rick Deckard's job is to go out and take a different device and measure other people and to see if they have any empathy or emotion. And if they don't, he kills them. Like, okay, so there's something going on here with this empathy thing and this emotion thing. And the real danger is that human beings could lose that, right? That's the warning for us. That if we lose empathy, we lose our humanity. And Mercerism, that's the whole point, right? There's this other device, there's all these cool devices in the novel. That's the empathy box. And if you grab the empathy handles, you are instantly connected to every human being on the planet who is also holding on to those handles. By the way, also in the colonies, the moon, the Mars, whatever.
The internet.
Yeah, it's the internet, right? But
And then they doom scroll.
they do scroll. But the different than the internet, though, they share empathy. You feel what everybody else feels. It's this beautiful human connection of souls and minds across this network. And you all also at the same time feel the suffering of Mercer, who's like a Christ-like figure. And he's getting rocks thrown at him and all this stuff. And every time he's hit, you feel the pain. And it's a test of your empathy is how long can you hold on? How long can you stick with it, right? With everybody else going through suffering and feeling what Mercer feels. And so that's one of the elements, of course. I understand why it's not in the film, because it's not exciting.
I'm just going to just break in real quick. I'm just going to ask a couple questions. Anyone can jump in. I've kind of briefly so people get more than one answer. What are some major events in Phil's life, and how do they affect his writing? Anyone?
Oh, that's an easy one. So,
Well, this allows me to talk about Radio Free Albemuth because he had an event he called 2374, which is not February 3rd, 1974, or March 2nd if you were European, but the months of February and March, during which he had visions and heard voices and wondered deeply if he was going schizophrenic, or if he was getting transmissions by the KGB from a modern art museum in Russia, or if he was being communicated with, as he kind of eventually came to believe, by what he called VALIS, Vast Active Living Intelligence System, which he then spent the next 10 years of his life, really till his death, pretty much intellectually obsessed with this idea of VALIS. And he wrote a 2 million word journal that he called the Exegesis, a lot of which has finally been published, which is really his notebooks of being skeptical about all this. I mean, he had a great sense of humor, and a lot of people theorized he was crazy when this happened. One of the things he heard was his radio